In this one I'm going to show you how I would paint a snow-capped dry stone wall. I've masked out the top of the wall first of all with masking fluid, and then I've painted the background in, and it's now time to remove the masking fluid. You can see there that as soon as I get rid of the masking fluid, we get the nice strong shape for the top of the wall in white paper with that blue behind it. Working from the foreground into the distance, having put masking fluid on the top of the wall, it would be a shame now to lose that white, so I'm careful to leave some white all the way along that top edge. I'm going back into it with the green, that hint of Oriolin and cobalt blue. And then straight away, while it's still wet, I've got the rich dark brown. I'm going to put some of that in the base of it. Inevitably it's a little bit darker nearer the ground where it's got damp, where the damp seeps up it from the ground. I'm going to use a little bit of this dark to suggest a few stones have fallen off the wall and are laying in the snow. I'm also going to use some of this dark to give us the impression of the stones themselves, the gaps between the stones as well on the top level there, but leaving plenty of white still to suggest the snow. I'm going to leave the wall alone for a moment and just mix a bit of shadow colour. I'm going to take a thin wash of cobalt blue with just a hint of cadmium red in it. That's also the colour that I used in the sky, because it's always worth toning in your shadows with your sky. And the light's coming from the right hand side, so I'm just going to use this shadow to describe the dip in the path and the slope up the snow, the drifted snow at the left hand side. Just puts a bit of shape in, a touch of water to soften it as well. Okay, that needs a bit of drying time. Well, now that the wall has dried, I need to work on some detail. So I'm starting with a number 4 brush, and I'm going to take the orange colour, that's the raw sienna and burnt sienna, and mix it with the cobalt blue and cadmium red. That creates a sort of grey colour. And just going to suggest a few random stone shapes, and random's important here because this is, remember, this isn't a dressed stone wall, it's an old weathered dry stone wall, and I don't need many of those. They're quite small, quite subtle, and then I'm going to carry on just developing the wall by using this dark paint to put a bit of detail in. And I'm looking for areas now where I can develop the shape of a stone, not by painting the stone, but by suggesting the crevices between them. So still with the number 2 detailer brush, I'm going to get some more dark brown, and I'm going to put a few fence posts in just the other side of the wall. And put a few little touches of shadow maybe on the snow on the wall. So I'm just going to leave that to dry before I finish it off with a few brush strokes of opaque white. So the finishing touch to this little scene now is to take some opaque white. I usually put this on the edge of my paper somewhere. So I've got the detailer brush. The brush is damp, not wet through, just damp, and the opaque white is neat. So I'm just going to use it first of all to enhance that tip of snow on top of the wall. Just add a few extra little touches of white, not to alter it, but to enhance it. Maybe a little bit on those posts there, because they've got a dark background behind them, so that will help to pick it out. And then let's put a little bit into the wall. You're bound to get little areas in an old dry stone wall where some stones protrude more than others and catch a bit of snow as it falls. So a little bit of that here and there does help to make it look convincing. Same with a few little bits of white at the base of the wall. Okay, that's completed. And here you can see this in the context of the finished picture. For this scene of a park in Manhattan, I've chosen to show you probably the most complex part of the picture, which is achieving that feeling of spraying water and splashes. I've first of all drawn an indication of the shape of the spouting water, but I've drawn it in very faintly. And the next thing to do then is apply masking fluid. I'm going to use the medium-sized masking fluid brush and start to put these spouts in. You're better to do this with quite quick strokes of the brush. If you do that, it breaks the line up into finer marks. They're narrower where they start, but they get more open and more like a spray shape as they get towards the top edge there, and then the water just falls back down. Okay, so that needs a moment to dry. Well, as you can see, I've now propped the board up. This is because the next stage is to apply some more masking fluid, but this time I'm going to try and spatter the masking fluid on using an old toothbrush so that it gives the appearance of splashes of water. I've started by pouring the masking fluid into the lid of the masking fluid bottle, and I'm going to make sure I've got plenty on this old toothbrush. And then straight away I've got a palette knife, and I'm going to scrape that towards me so that it makes little splashes. And very important to remember to pull the knife towards yourself so that the splashes of masking fluid go away from you. If you do it the other way around, you'll think nothing's happening, and you'll look in the mirror and your face will be covered in little spots of masking fluid. That should be plenty, so we'll leave it to dry. Well, it's all dried now, and I've got rid of those blobs of masking fluid that were unwanted. I've now mixed some colours. Before I apply those, I'm getting a large 1-inch flat brush, and I'm just going to wet the background behind the water spouts. I'm doing this carefully so as not to disturb the little dots of masking fluid, but this will make it easier to put that background in. As soon as I've done that, I'm getting a number 16 brush with that rich dark green made of Viridian, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and I'm applying that all over the background behind the masking fluid. The beauty of the masking fluid is, of course, that you can now ignore it. I'm going for a bit of the bluer green now. This is the Viridian and Cobalt blue, a bit of that in. And then I'm going to a smaller brush. This is a number 10, and this has got the bright green on it, the Oriolin and Cobalt blue, to suggest that the background foliage is getting a little bit lighter and less dense towards the top. And before I remove the masking fluid, that needs some time to dry. Well, now that the background's dry, we can rub the masking fluid off and see what we've got. Okay, so you can see that we've got a few little splashes around it, and we've actually got the shape of those spouts of water, but it needs a bit more paint now to develop it. So first of all, I've got a number 2 detailer brush and some of that bluey green, which is the Cobalt blue and Viridian. I've watered it down a little bit so it's not too strong. And I'm going to just take some of the whiteness off this by putting a touch of the blue into it, nice and thin, just developing that sort of arced shape in the water. Got to be careful with something like this you don't overdo it, because you can end up covering up all the white that you spent time masking. A few little streaks here and there amongst the white, and then I'm washing the brush and going straight to the opaque white, and let's start to improve that curve in it and the way the water runs back down again, using the thick paint to catch the texture of the paper. A bit into here. Using the number 2, you can get some really fine lines. And here you can see this effect in the context of the finished picture. In this one, we're going to have a look at how you can make it look convincing when you're painting a tree with some branches that are coming straight from the trunk towards you. In this example here, you can see I've painted a tree in winter with a branch going to the right and a branch going to the left of the trunk. That's relatively easy to do. But of course, if we only have branches going to the left and right, it can look a little bit two-dimensional. So I've just got a number 2 brush, a detailer, and some really thick dark brown, burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. I'm going to put a branch here coming from the centre of the trunk to appear as though it's coming towards us. It comes out like that, maybe dips down, get a few branches coming from it. Good to get a branch that comes across it and cuts across the trunk like that. Wants to be a bit wider where it leaves the trunk, and I've got a bit more of the dark brown and putting a little ring or mark underneath it. That's quite important. That helps to really place it. Now let's have a look at that again. I'll do one a bit further down the trunk that's going in the other direction. Same principle. start off with it a bit wider, work across there, bring it out almost towards us, let it cross the trunk, make quite a lot of branch work, because trees in winter like this are quite busy with branches. And then I'm going to emphasise the bit where it leaves the trunk again a bit more. Get that little, like a ring underneath it. With a fairly dry brush, extend those a little further. And then that needs a little bit of shadow from the branch onto the trunk itself, but before we do that I need to let it dry. Well, now that those branches have dried, I've just mixed a little bit of shadow colour. I've chosen a bit of cobalt blue and rose madder, and I've added a touch of burnt sienna that to grey it slightly. I don't think it's important for this top one because it's pretty much dark all the way down the right-hand side where that branch comes in, so that actually appears like shadow without me doing anything. But this one, we'll just put it here, coming out and going to the right from that branch. And it's quite subtle, but it's little subtle things like that that often make a difference. Because there's a mass and tangle of branches on a tree like this, there's probably other areas on the trunk where you'd have a few shadows cutting across, and you can do that with the shadow colour. Just put a few marks across the trunk, and then I'm mixing the dark brown with the shadow colour to create a sort of thinner, slightly lighter brown, and I'm just going to try and give the impression that there are some branches and twigs, etc., the other side of the trunk, the far side from where we are viewing the scene. So I'll put a few into here, making it quite busy. And because these are a lighter tone, this also helps to make it look more three-dimensional. So you can see how when we started the tree looked fine, but it was a little bit two-dimensional. But those branches coming from the centre of the trunk towards us have made quite a difference. Then that was further enhanced with those few hints of shadow. And finally, the glimpse of twigs and branches the other side of the trunk to really make it look realistic. And here you can see this in the context of the finished picture. For this one, we're going to be looking through the tree branches into the sunlight. So we need to try and capture that almost bleached out effect. So what I need to do is get a number 8 brush and some clean water. Really load up the brush, and I need to have a piece of kitchen roll or tissue standing by to try and dab out a bit of colour. So I'm looking at the area where I've got the white paper behind it and just gently washing over it with clean water and dabbing with a bit of tissue. Now you can see that that doesn't get rid of the branches, but it fades them back. And this is why you have to do it bit by bit and take it carefully. If you rub away vigorously at it and then dab, you might find you just got rid of the branch altogether. We need to be a bit more subtle than that. I think we'll remove a bit of paint there, dab it with the tissue. You need to keep changing the tissue so that you're using a clean, dry piece all the time. A bit more water, I think, around that area. A bit more dabbing. Touch there. And I think we'll fade it just a touch more. Nearly there, but just to take a touch more colour out of it right in the centre there. So it's as simple as that. There's the completed effect. It is important to take it slowly and remove the paint bit by bit. If you're too vigorous with the brush and you dab too hard with the tissue, you'll just get rid of the branch altogether and you'll have to start painting it again. And here you can see this effect in the context of the finished picture. So that brings us to the end of the programme. I hope you'll join me next time for some more tips and techniques, but in the meantime, happy painting.
Now available to buy. Try these techniques at home whenever you wish. The extended DVD of today's workshop and the book that accompanies this series are now available from the Painting and Drawing channel. For further information and to order your copy, go to www.paintingdrawingchannel.com.